African artists are expected to create like poverty porn, especially in Africa. And if you aren't making poverty porn, you don't really fall into this canon of fine African art. My way of resisting was always just like saying like, fuck it, man, like I'm gonna make whatever I wanna make, but the work will just rely on like ability to create a feeling.
Welcome to Raw and Real, our first episode of a podcast series where we will be focusing on demystifying the art world for anyone who feels like they are intimidated to walk into it. Our first episode is going to be with Samurai Farai, who has opened the show at Origin Art at Dior in Cape Town. And we're very excited to get going. I think this podcast series is going to be something very special. And welcome, Farai. I hope you are having a great week so far. I think you've been very busy. How's things going?
Fantastic, man. Happy to be here in Cape Town. Even more happy and excited to go home back to Johannesburg.
So in this series, we're just going to be conducting a few questions. There will be some hard-hitting ones as well as some very simple ones that will just be about you.
Yeah.
So I think let's start off with your identity and origins. Firstly, you often speak about wearing masks. What mask did you wear growing up?
Good question, man. I think from like the physicality of it, the masks I used to love wearing was Spider-Man and Batman masks. But I think when it comes down to the more personal and vulnerable kind of personifications of those masks, it was always one of like a code switching like nature. I was always either, if I was with my like colored family, the darkest person in the colored community, whether that was like Eldorado Park or at church. And when I was with my dad's side of the family, or Shona, I was always, the son who couldn't speak Shona, and I never really understood what anybody was saying. So I always felt that I had to blend in. I had to kind of either water myself down and just try my best to participate in, the cultural ecosystem that I found myself in. And that always meant like wearing a different mask with my mom, wearing a different mask with my dad, and kind of bouncing between those two at the same time that I'd bounce between households. And it was always tricky. It was always tricky, and I always felt a bit embarrassed, but I, was different.
Sure.
Yeah.
So just to follow up on that, how did your dual heritage influence your view of creativity and self-expression?
I think being someone who's of dual heritage, only in my later years of life have I understood that it's actually quite a superpower. And what I mean by that is I have two massive wells of like cultural heritage to essentially work with or tap into as inspiration. I have the colored side of my heritage, which has a long historical explanation and standing like in the Western Cape, post-colonial activity, the Dutch, the settlers. And then I also have a royal Zimbabwean heritage, which ties into Great Zimbabwe, ancient artifacts, gold, sculpture, ceremonies, ritual, and being part of an amazing family tree from Zim. I didn't understand that growing up. Now I think I see it as a privilege. I see it as a privilege to kind of be this third culture hybrid who has the opportunity to now express themselves in this landscape. Yeah.
Amazing. Cool. Was there a turning point where art became not just personal expression, but your purpose?
Yes. I think the turning point for me was when I quit my job in hospitality, because I think everything up until that point was just like really playing it safe. It was, okay, I paint a bit and it is an expression, I studied this, but it is just like, not a hobby, but like something that my livelihood isn't tied into. And I think once I made the decision to risk it all and kind of say, I'm putting my foot down on this pedal and art will be the only thing that like sustains me, then it became my purpose because there was no other safety nets and there was no option of it not like working out for me.
And what made you decide to take that step?
I think what made me what made me decide to take that step was like, honestly, it was like pettiness. And what I mean by that, it was pettiness in the sense of seeing artists in my country, like who are now my peers, but at the time, like seeing people get recognized, whether it's like commercially or brand deals or galleries, and them kind of, you know, creating motion and momentum in their careers, doing what they love. But I always felt like I felt like I was better than them. And I felt like what I had to offer the landscape and the community was better. And I was petty about it. You know, I think it was a combination of pettiness and jealousy, but I realized that if I don't give myself the opportunity to see where this thing goes, I'll just be petty and jealous forever. You know, now a lot of the people who kind of inspired that switch are like people who now ask me for advice in certain regards and contexts. So I think it's always good to be aware of your surroundings, be aware of the like your colleagues, your peers, and the actions and activities that they take, and go a similar path if it's working.
And I'm sure that drive, by not having that fallback, must have been huge for you. I think, you know, a lot of people never commit to that, and I think it's really inspiring that you've made that your brand pretty much, you know, just to never give up, and when life is hard, say, okay, well, let's push through, which I think is incredible. Cool. Okay, let's move on. The art world itself, gatekeeping and grit.
Fire.
What has shocked you the most about the professional art world?
What shocked me the most about the professional art world in the South African context is just like, and just for lack of a better term, man, like how lame it is. You know, how blasé and bland everything is and how safe everybody plays it. You know, I think a lot of artists find themselves being recognized for a certain visual language or a certain signature or a certain subject matter, and then they just end up like leaning on that for years. And I'm somebody who like really doesn't understand that concept. You know, I think a lot of the time artists become like slaves to their own talent because the talent essentially like creates a cage around you and you can't break out of that cage because of fear. So that's one thing that I realized is the lack of bravery. The other thing that I realized is like how there's like an entourage of like quote unquote cool kids who the art world kind of circulates or exchanges in and out. And if you aren't really in that clique, you just kind of fall by the wayside if you don't have enough tenacity to like create or force space for yourself, which I think just feeds into that like inability of bravery. You know, as a young artist, you think, okay, those are the cool people, those are the people getting shows, those are the people like making money. I need to behave like them, I need to act like them, I need to dress like them, and I need to hang out with them in order to get the same recognition. And a lot of the time, you end up code switching into a person that you don't even recognize just to like make this dream come true, which to me is like very unhealthy and backwards. So I think a lot of the time, the people that I see in the space, they're all just like mannequins of one another. And it kind of depresses me because I feel like we're so behind the global trajectory of the fine art community or the art community at a whole. We're like still so fixated on being cool. We're still like fixated on like being palatable and acceptable. Like Nobody's like throwing shit on sculptures anymore, like human feces on sculptures, which is like a radical move, but we need more of that. So
So what would you say to emerging artists so that they could get to that point where, you know, they are embracing themselves rather than embracing what the market wants them to be?
I think what I tell a lot of young kids who are asking for advice is that first and foremost, you need to be patient, but in that patience, you need to be proactive. And what I mean is like, just because you're patient, it doesn't mean you aren't working. So go out and like make work every day, like learn from as many people as you can, watch as many documentaries as you can, watch as many like YouTube conversations or podcasts as you can, read as many books as you can, like play with as many mediums as you can, like find what actually makes you excited to create and just focus on that. But at the end of the day, remember that like your sincerity towards who you are will scream more volumes than like whatever you put on canvas or whatever you put on paper or whatever you like create into a sculpture. I think what I look for in artists is more not even like what they create, but it's like who they are as people, like your personality, like your story, your tenacity. Like you can make the most beautiful work in 2 dimensions, but you can be a horrible human. You know, and I think the two don't always have to be mutually exclusive. Like, I think you need to focus on becoming like a healthy, functional human being, whatever that means for you. And then that invites people to want to become intimate with your work, just by default, because you have a story and you're proud of your story and you like own your story, you know? That for me is more exciting than just like this whole degenerate, alcoholic, drug abuser, abused artist narrative that's been like alive for the past like 50 years.
Have you ever felt excluded or tokenized in gallery spaces?
Great question. I think I felt more of that energy in art school. And I think that's like where it probably predominantly is, because they're kind of trying to get you ready for the art world, like outside of the tertiary institution of education. But for the longest time, I almost felt that, and I guess this body of work is also a testament to that, like African artists are expected to create like poverty porn, you know, especially in Africa. And if you aren't making poverty porn, you don't really fall into this canon of fine African art. You know, it's either like poverty, politics, or like race. So that for me always felt like the tokenization through expectations, right? And my way of resisting was always just like, by like saying like, fuck it, man, like I'm gonna make whatever I wanna make, but I'm gonna be smarter than you. I'm gonna make work that is like, yes, it's gonna be intellectually grounded. It's gonna be like hyper aware of art history, but it's also gonna be so fluid that it doesn't matter who made the work. It doesn't matter what color the skin or the gender of the person who made the work is, because the work won't rely on race or gender or class. The work will just rely on like its substance, its strength, its like aesthetic, sensuous like ability to create a feeling. And whether the artist is male, female, trans, or whatever, it won't really matter. You know, so that's how I resist the tokenization, and I think I'm doing pretty well at that.
Yeah, and I think far too few people realize that the art is timeless. You know, it never actually matters who created it. It is unfortunate that, you know, a lot of people of color and women were never given the opportunity to show in the recent past, well, up until very recently. But yeah, there have been artists that have created average work that is just never seen again. So
Yeah.
I think it really is down to the artist, well, the art itself more so than the artist.
Definitely. But I also think that I think art that is like reactionary is very like, it becomes translucent in the sense that if you have no idea what was happening, like in the 60s during the feminist movement, and people are making art about the feminist movement, you need context now to understand the work because it's reactionary to like a political uprising or a time. Instead of looking at the work and trying to kind of establish a feeling, you know, so creating work that is like ultimately based on its context and its environment. Like, what does that mean in 50 years when the world's changed? What does it mean in 100 years? It essentially means that the work no longer is important, you know, because it's been dislocated from the time of its understanding. You can't like ask people to like rewind 100 years and like come into that context again and understand it. I think that's why like the master painters like Cézanne or just anybody during the Renaissance period, there was such a focus on creating like these masterful artworks because they could be understood and related to like forever. You know, it was like these incredible like neoclassical paintings or these neoclassical French paintings that honestly just relied on beauty and divinity. You know, they weren't like, yes, there was like the French Revolution and all of that, but it wasn't like tied and like grounded in this context of like, this is how life is right now and this is how life will be forever. It was also like, look how amazing we can paint and look how beautiful this is. And it was just a focus on creating a beautiful image. Yeah. Sometimes I think we forget about that.
Yeah.
Like sometimes the work doesn't need to be understood further than it's just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people get annoyed with the fact that things have been done before, everything's been done.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, yes, that is something that you can focus on, but I think what is more important is the fact that people are taking things that have been done and recreating it in their own style. And I think that's what's so amazing about what you've done, because people come in here and they're like, oh, Basquiat, George Condo, but the fact of the matter is you've combined so many different styles and made it your own, which I think a lot of artists struggle to do. So kudos to you. Okay, moving on. What's a hard truth about selling art no one prepared you for?
A hard truth about selling art is that it's difficult, but it's also, it's dependent on like your ability to sell anything. You know, if you don't know how to sell a pen, if you don't know how to sell a pencil, if you don't know how to sell a piece of paper, how can you expect to know how to sell a work of art that you've created? I think one of the best lessons that I learned whilst working, you know, as an auctioneer was taking the emotional tie out of the sales process, because you have to. It's business. It's unfortunately the work exists in a capitalistic environment and a capitalistic canon. So what you have to do is treat it as a capitalist. Once the work is done, once you've engaged with it in that spiritual and divine process that is creating work, then it falls into this reality where it's a product. And you have to then understand that your language has to change drastically. You have to be able to put a price on the work, and in the same breath, you have to be able to be open to negotiations about the price of the work. You need to be able to be comfortable talking about the sale and the procurement of your artwork. And that wasn't ever a discussion that was had in art school or in formal training at all. And it's a bit absurd to me, and I always talk about how stupid I think it is that there's no entrepreneurial or sales psychology courses in art school. Because I think if you're bombarded with the fact that you're here to create a product from the first year you start studying art, when you leave, you'll be formidable at that, you know? And I think the gallery essentially comes in as that business middleman that the artist doesn't know how to be or perform as. And it's not to say that that's a good or bad thing, it just is a function. But then I always think about like, how do we optimize ourselves, not just as human beings, but like as people in our profession, you know? And that's why, same thing I would say to young artists is like, read books, broaden your horizons, like learn how to sell something, you know? Instead of like growing older and older each year and like relying always on somebody else to do it for you. I definitely see the benefit of having gallery shows and working in this capacity, but in the same breath, I see the benefit in knowing how to like close a deal with the private client yourself, you know, and I think there's amazing benefits in both of those realities.
I think what becomes difficult for a lot of artists is, as you say, kind of finding that middle ground between creating and being able to sell, you know, or putting yourself out there, marketing yourself. And I think that's something that you've done so incredibly well. But again, I think so few people realize how much hard work you put in, you know, like you are constantly training or working or following up on social media. Like it's just, it's actually mind blowing to me. So I think that's what a lot of youngsters especially need to take note of, is that you don't get anywhere without hard work.
No,
you know,
for
there
sure.
are no shortcuts in life. You might get a little step up every now and then, but you know, without actually putting in the hard yards, it's not going to get you anywhere.
100%, I mean, like in any way in life.
Exactly. Doesn't even need to be the art market.
No.
That's the thing. Okay. Next little section: mental health and creative survival.
Yeah.
Your work is so emotionally charged. How do you protect your mental health while exposing your inner world?
Wow, that's a good question. I think, you know, as I approach like the 3-year mark of sobriety, that question means something completely different to me now compared to what it did 3 years ago, where when I was making work pre-COVID, it was always about like getting like a bit tipsy or smoking like a few joints to get into like this mood of creating work, you know, which meant that which meant that like finding that space mentally to create work always relied on a substance. And yeah, substance abuse is rife in our country and in the world, but now it's so interesting because I feel like I'm always in that zone, I'm always in that mood. Like in any moment of the day, I'm ready to create a work of art. And I think what that's done for my lifestyle is like it's completely eliminated like the bullshit. And what I mean by that is like, I don't hang out with people I don't want to be around. I don't find myself in spaces I don't want to be in. I don't find myself like subject to a lot of emotions that I don't want to feel. And what that does for my mental health is that it protects it. You know, so by design, by choosing to like be sober, by choosing to be more mindful, more healthy, more wholesome in my decision making, my mental health is benefiting because I'm more protected. As an empath and a sensitive person, I'm just able to kind of exist in my environment and ecosystem so much easier now. Whereas when I was like really relying on like substances to inspire my creativity, I would always find myself in like shitty situations around people I didn't like, whether I was like self-harming or like partying too much. And I think all of those like variables affect us, you know, and it's already such a precarious world to be in, man. It's like, there's nothing in this world, especially in this profession, that is certain. So to increase the uncertainty in an already uncertain environment, it's just stupid. So I control the variables that I can. I am okay with not controlling the ones that I can't, and just like live every 24 hours as best as I can. And I think at the end of the day, I just like, don't do stupid shit, I don't hang around people that don't make me feel good about myself. I practice sincerity and transparency whenever I can, and when I realize like that's not reciprocated, I just either keep to myself or move on. And that allows me to like safeguard the work that I make. It allows me to be as vulnerable as I want to be, or as I can be, whilst making the work, because I feel safe enough to. And my work now is so much more intimate, and my relationship with my work is so much more intimate than it ever has been, because I think it's just an accurate reflection of where I am in my life as a person.
Amazing. And advice to anyone who might be wanting to get down the same path of sobriety, because I obviously know a number of people who have attempted to and failed. And so what do you suggest might help?
I think that, it's a tricky road, and like, man, even for myself, like, this is almost like my fourth and longest stint of sobriety, but the one that's been the most important. I've tried, and I failed, and now it's succeeding. But you kind of have to, and I think it's unfortunate, but you kind of have to get to your lowest low, which is quite a sad reality. And that was at least how I found it. But you have to really want it more than anything else. And you need to be brave enough to like go on that journey, because it's not a team sport. It's not something that like you and your buddies go on together, because it's not a collective experience. It's a purely individual and selfish decision to improve your life. But I've also come to understand that not everybody wants to improve their lives. So in that breath and in that understanding, at the end of the day, man, you need to do you. Like, if your life is as great as you want, and like you're cool with like living up to 60% of your potential, like John Mayer said, then that's fine. That's you. Nobody's forcing you to like stop drinking or like smoking weed or like partying and doing drugs, because it's your life. But I think for the select few people who like want more out of this existence, then you just have to be brave enough to like take that leap into the abyss. Just like anything in life, where you need to be like willing to take the risk, willing to be alone, willing to be isolated, and investing in that decision. And it pays off.
Cool. Okay, last question on that section. How does vulnerability fuel or fight against your creativity?
Yo. Vulnerability is I think it's a tool for me, in the sense that, Samurai Farai as like a performative character a lot of the time is to safeguard like me as a person. The pseudonym is put there to kind of protect like the inner child. But in the same breath, the pseudonym is also there to like remind the inner child that it's okay to play, it's okay to go on adventures, it's okay to be curious. So I think the fact that I've created a character that I can embody, that is like an extension of myself but also separate, creates this third space where like vulnerability becomes like just the color of the environment, And I mean, vulnerability is something that every artist is like confronted with when they look at a blank canvas or a blank page or a new project. You're essentially like stared at directly by like the potential of everything, like the infinite creative possibility. Yeah, you're like staring into the void, and it's a very vulnerable place to be in. But how you kind of take that next step really dictates what you'll create, where you'll go, your response to the work's response to you. But I think I always kind of imagine like vulnerability almost being a lot of the time disguised as bravery, right? And vice versa. Bravery being disguised as vulnerability in a lot of different contexts. Because the braver you can become, the more vulnerable you can be. And the more vulnerable you can be, the braver you are, to be honest, not just with the world, but with yourself. And it's quite interesting what you find on the other side of that, because then you aren't really hyper focused on external affirmation, validation, support, affirmation. You kind of just go with what feels good for you. And when it's coming from like that really sincere space, it's authentic. And people resonate with it, whether you know it or intend on it being something that anybody would resonate with.
Amazing. Cool. We're going to move on to purpose, business, and the future.
Fire.
Do you feel pressure to perform success on social media?
I'd say like yes and no. I think that a lot of the time I'm reminded that like I don't fully comprehend how many people like watch what I post, or who are inspired by what I post or what I do, or like the seeds that I plant. Certain things, I do post and I'm like, yeah, this better get 1,000 likes or better get 2,000 likes, but that's more just like the vanity kind of subject matter. But I think when I post work, it's more to kind of release it into the world so I can make space for other visions to kind of come to life. I think that the role of social media in my life is to create insight for anybody who wants to be part of my audience. It's like, it's there for you to kind of see who I am behind the curtain. What it performs like doesn't really, like, I don't care. Okay. Like, whether nobody likes this thing or whatever, it's kind of just part of a bigger journey for me, like whatever I post this week won't look like whatever I post next week or next month. But I think it's so important to have people with you on the journey. For me, like as a creative, that was something I understood like when I was incredibly young. Like when social media, like Twitter and Instagram came into our lives, I was like, if I'm gonna be somebody who's always opening themselves up to judgment and critique in my like professional capacity, I'm gonna like go all the way with this. Like I'm gonna express most of my thoughts, most of my daily life, most of my opinions in quite a curated manner, but I'm gonna do it like all the time, And I've almost come to understand that it's me on stage performing, because the world is really an audience. A lot of us as individuals are just spectators, and then there's like 1 in every 100 spectator that's a performer, but doesn't like actually realize that they have to perform for the spectators, or that they get a sense of joy and excitement from performing and giving people something to watch, creating a spectacle, and that's really what I do, is just create a spectacle in my life. But like none of this is really like bullshit. It's like I'm really up early in the morning running. And then like after that, I'm really like in the studio painting, smoking a cigar. And then I'm like really at an event or doing shit, and I think it helps, especially like young creatives, understand like, this is possible. You don't need to be out at like 3, 4, 5 a.m. in the morning. You can like be in bed by 9. You can actually give a shit about what you paint and work and read books and like be cool. Like you can be nerdy and passionate about something and be cool. You don't have to kind of put yourself into this, I'm so cool, I don't give a fuck about anything like trope. Because that I think is just like, that's fake. Like be proud of what you care about, be proud of your interests, and like speak about it. Like if you fucking interested in ponies, man, like that's your thing, like be proud of it. That's who you are. And I think that shift of understanding what you like and wanting to show the world what makes you happy is super important to me in my like internet relationship persona type thing.
Yeah, so you more do a journal entry than thirst traps and try and show people what they're missing out on. Rather, this is my life. This is how I live.
Yeah,
And I think I think that's really cool because I think so many people post these fake everything, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, they're living this great life." Meanwhile, they're suffering as much as everyone else. You know.
Oh, and they sang.
And all they care about is the likes. So I like that. I think far too few people are focused on just posting their life rather than what they think other people want to see.
Yeah, definitely, man. What a great question.
Cool. Okay, how do you separate the work you want to make from the work that sells?
Yo, the work, the work that I want to make kind of overlaps with the work that I sell and vice versa, because I have such an array of like visual expression, right? And I'm not afraid to make it. You know, like hence like the sculpture that you're sitting next to, or the ceramics or the carpets, the wooden sculptures, the basketball upstairs. I think I more look at the work that I want to make as everything has a potential to sell. And in the same breath, the work that you're afraid of making kind of is denying you an audience that you don't know yet exists for you, right? So like, why be afraid to try a new medium? Why be afraid to take your work into a new context? Why be afraid to reimagine your visual language? Because that means that you're opening up your audience base or the capacity for audience. So I don't look at work that like is super maybe commercial and just try and milk it. If anything, once I realized that most of like my reputation was as a brand or commercial artist, like painting murals for Mercedes or Heineken, I was like, oh, I can see where this is going. I'm gonna stop that right now, and I'm gonna call Ali at Origin Art and tell him I want to do my first solo show, because that's now what needs to happen before I put myself in this cage. And then like 5 years down the line, I haven't had a solo exhibition and I call myself a fine artist. Now I'm really just that guy that works for brands. So I always see the potential of growth in the work that I want to make. And when I know that people like certain work, sometimes I just stop doing it, you know? But I always kind of move with what like I'm curious of and about. I still like bring in elements and like visual language hints into new work. I think my work will just by default have a piece of me in everything, but I'm not afraid to branch out. I don't like limit myself.
Awesome. And then, what legacy do you hope to leave behind as an artist?
I think the legacy that I hope to leave behind is not one that just finds itself in the creative community. I think it's a legacy of, I don't want to like say humanitarianism, but it's one that like has a universal like application, where I just really want to be known as somebody who gave it their all. One, as a person who was always sincere when anybody interacted with me, and quite generally speaking, like a person who like left the garden better than how he found it. You know, I think my legacy isn't really wrapped up in vanity. I think about like mortality very much. It's been something that's like in my life all the time. So yes, people will remember me and will have the capacity to remember me through my art. But then the people that like, the amazing people that I've worked with, that I've collaborated with, I think there's a separation between the art and like me in that interaction. And I really love that. I love the ability to like inspire people to become better, or to inspire people to do something that they're afraid of, and to be remembered as that. not to be remembered as like this visual artist who did X, Y, or Z, or who collaborated with A, B, and C. I just want to be remembered as a person that kind of encouraged people to want more for themselves and to do better for themselves.
Awesome. Cool. And then I'm just going to hit you with a quick fire round, so very easy answers. What's one artist that changed your life?
Basquiat's.
What's a book or film that inspired your latest work?
Credo Mutua and Double My Children.
Worst advice you ever got?
Keep painting the same way.
Dream collaboration? Jared.
Takashi Murakami. Yeah.
And what's one thing you wish artists knew?
That you can do anything. Like you can fucking do anything.
Everybody, this was Raw and Real at Origin Art at Dior with Samurai Farai. Big thank you to everyone. Follow us for more insights into unfiltered realities of the art world. See you next time.